This is Ambition Today. Today we are joined by Terry Young. He is the CEO and founder of Sparks and Honey, a 24/7 culture newsroom which identifies the biggest trends happening in the world today.
These are the entrepreneurs, creators, investors, and builders who ambitiously change to the world. Explore the hardships and heroisms of everyday life while we reveal the key moments to leave behind a lasting legacy. This is Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar.
What's up, world? I am Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today. Make sure you subscribe to our website, siskar.co, or your favorite podcast app so you never miss the latest episodes. Last episode, we were joined with Anthony Pompliano, also known as Pomp. He's the managing partner at Full Tilt Capital, which invests in the latest cryptocurrencies and crypto assets. But today we are joined by Terry Young. He's the founder and CEO of Sparks and Honey, a 24/7 culture newsroom identifying the biggest trends happening in the world. Terry, welcome to Ambition Today.
Thank you, Kevin. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're here on Madison Ave, the global home of the advertising world.
We are.
How is life as the real world madman?
Wow, that's a big statement. Look, I mean, it's been an amazing journey to set up, and I love the idea from the very beginning of being a founder, an entrepreneur in advertising on Madison Avenue.
Yeah.
Because in a certain way, can you redefine what the industry is, but in exact contrast to what it was in the 60s. So.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And I'm excited to hear more about what Sparks and Honey has become today. But before we get there, let's take it back to the beginning like we always do. So tell us about how you got your start, where you grew up, some of your early life lessons that maybe you still carry with you today.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up in Kentucky, small town in Western Kentucky.
Okay.
Look, what did I learn from being there is, I think for any of us that are in New York, having the experience of understanding value systems and small town life in complete contrast to big city life is a good thing. I mean, it gives you a perspective, especially in a day and age like we're in now, where we see so much divide and polarization, and trying to understand what drives two sides of a debate. And I think there is something very important in that concept about the way we've structured Sparks and Honey. So I grew up in Kentucky, and I ended up in Texas in graduate school. So I knew early on that I was interested in advertising. So I actually have a master's degree in advertising, which is a little unusual. And my first job out of the university was working in digital and internet, right? And when I joined, at that time it was IPG, which is an advertising holding company. It was a small little group that had just started doing digital advertising in '95.
Okay.
And I mean,
The internet's barely loading images.
It's barely loading images. I mean, the funny thing is, my thesis, and this is kind of a funny story, my thesis in grad school was on the webmaster, and it was understanding the impact of the webmaster. No one even knows what a webmaster is now. Like, what the fuck's a webmaster, right? I don't know if I can say fuck on that.
There you go for it.
And what's a webmaster? So I wrote on that, and that allowed me to, have a perspective on what was starting to emerge at that time. And I came into a small little group of, they just won a couple of clients. They had Subaru and American Airlines and a couple others, I think the United States Air Force, and they were trying to figure out what to do from a digital standpoint. I joined the group of 3 or 4, and the other funny story, this is kind of a learning moment. Out of grad school, I knew how to do HTML, and so they said, okay, we want you to help build the websites. And so I went through, and probably not my forte of like that kind, doing any kind of coding, but I did it, and we're getting by. And I remember going in, and they're like, the guy calls me into his office, and he's like, we just did an analysis on the code that you've written, and it's got like 300,000 errors in it. And I'm like, shit, I'm going to be fired like right now. And he's like, so I don't think you're really cut out to build websites, but we see the way you interact with clients. We think it'd be perfect to interact with, to deal with the clients. So I kind of quickly shifted and started explaining the value of digital and where it was going. And, Fast forward 2 years after that, I was running that company, and it was a top digital company out of Texas. And that was kind of the start. I mean, in a certain way, it was entrepreneurship, but within another company.
Yeah.
But it was, I was 27 and having the opportunity to run a company and really in the beginning of the internet. Then I left and joined McKinsey, and I went to China. And, I worked in an accelerator in Greater China. Basically, I was based out of Hong Kong, but we were tackling startup initiatives that were funded by multinational corporations that were happening across Taiwan and China. Really great experience. I mean, clearly some really bright individuals. It gave me a deeper understanding of frameworks and how to think about business strategy and how to put together business strategy. And when I finished that, I came back to the States, and I joined a database marketing firm and helped them with both digital strategy and then overall strategy. I did that for several years, and at that time, I think I had turned 31, 32, and I loved everything I'd done, but I needed a break. And I was like, I've got to, it's like one of those, you get to that point in your career and you're like, if I continue doing this, maybe I'll just be doing this forever. like, do I need to make sure the chapters are unfolding in the right way?
Yeah.
And so I asked myself, maybe I just need to put a backpack on and go vagabonding across the world for a while. But instead I joined the Peace Corp, which was a little bit of a left turn. And
so I want to go down the Peace Corps route, but I want to tangent before and stay on some of the stuff before that for a second. So I actually got a question. I got here a little bit early today to set up some of the equipment. I got a question from your team. So Nikolai wants to know, apparently Nikolai used to host a rap show, and he was interviewing Noriega, and he asked Noriega, when you were 18, what did you think you were doing? And he said he thought he'd be dead. So my question to you is, you obviously got a degree in advertising. When you were younger, is this what you thought you would be doing?
Yes.
All right. Well,
it's one of those weird things. My partner said, when you were 18 and someone said, what was your dream job or what did you expect to be doing? And I was like, I wanted to run a company.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, I don't know. I think I kind of knew that from
So let's maybe
the
unpack
beginning.
that a bit, right? Because I think, we talked about this a little bit on the last episode with Anthony about how when people do the self-work early enough, you can reap the dividends longer, right? So if you don't figure your stuff out until you're in your 50s, then you've got a few years to work. But if you could figure it out younger in life, do the self-work, whatever that is for you, you can reap this benefit. So how do you think you came to that conclusion? Were there entrepreneurs in your family?
Yeah.
What do you think put you there?
I think a couple of things. I mean, number one, I think my father and his father were both entrepreneurs.
Okay.
They started their own companies. I saw that they still own a company in the city that I'm from, and my brother works with him. So it's a family-owned business for 3 generations. And so I was around that from a very young age. And, I think, that gave me a perspective on the world. The second thing is I was from a small town, but I was lucky enough to have a family that liked to explore the world, and we went everywhere. And I think that exposure to other ways and how things operate beyond the geographic boundaries that you're in is impactful. And then lastly, I would say, maybe 2 other things. One, I had my grandparents. I was very close to my grandmother, and I think she was just one of those individuals that was driven and set the bar very high on what you could accomplish. And I think that she didn't see a lot of barriers. If you had the idea, you could go for it. And I think having that ingrained in the way you think early in life just allows you to kind of work through things, not see them as obstacles. And I would probably say the fact that although I didn't know it at the time, or I hadn't come to the awareness of being gay at when I was 18, it probably had an impact. I mean, there was that in me, and I needed to explore that in a place other than small town Kentucky. And I think it pushes you to explore different options as opposed to just going with the status quo when you're also you're on your self-discovery.
Yeah. So I know you're also a proponent for Start Out, and I guess while we're on the topic, let's just keep going with it. How has being gay and being a founder, how is all that sort of interplayed, and what advice I guess would you have for other people in similar situations?
Yeah, I would say that it's been a journey.
Yeah.
If you're a founder and entrepreneur, you have an entrepreneurial journey. If you are gay in small town America, you have a coming out journey. And for a long time, I wasn't out, and I was saying before we started the podcast, I was in DC on Tuesday, and, there was a stat that I heard Dr. Vivian Ming say. She said that 50% of people in corporate America who are gay are still not out. And that, we're in 2018 and that's still the case. May not be the case in New York and San Francisco, but when you look broadly
every
across,
other city, yeah,
all the cities across the US, there's a lot of people who just don't feel comfortable of being out. The first time that I was fully out was with Sparks and Honey. And I, from day one, open with every single employee. And, it was better from the standpoint of that it allowed you to be your whole self. I brought my partner, Brian Janesco. He was involved in the company from the very beginning. He's on our advisory board. It allowed us to leverage, and we'll talk about Sparks and Honey in a moment, but we leverage the platform of Sparks and Honey, not just to do the work that we do for clients, but also to have a platform to tackle big issues and, issues that are important to policy making and so forth and so on. And I think it allowed me to tap into that passion and as an entrepreneur, wear two hats.
Yeah.
The hat of building a company and the hat of trying to make a difference in things that you care about.
Yeah. And I think to your point at the beginning of the podcast, it all comes down to perspectives, right? And like you can have a small town perspective, you can have all these different perspectives, and that's sort of what, makes up what ends up kind of being the ethos or the culture of your company, because it's really like putting yourself into what is this being you're creating, which I love.
Yeah, it's kind of a reflection of you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you come in and you get a little, and it's a reflection of all the people that you hire too. I mean, I don't know that it's healthy for it to be a founder cult kind of reflection.
Yes.
I think it's great when it's balanced, but if you peel back the layers, you'll see a lot of the individuals. And I think I say to every person who was here in the first few years of Sparks and Honey that has left, you're also leaving your shape and your mold on the company because it is a reflection of them too.
Yeah, there is a legacy there.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's come back to Peace Corps. Let's catch back up at the present, or where we were left off. So you joined the Peace Corps. Where'd you go? What was that journey like? What'd you learn?
So, I decided not to vagabond. I decided to sign up for Peace Corps. And I remember I wanted to go to the South Pacific. And I, had these grandiose ideas of helping people, but kind of getting a little bit of relaxation. And I remember getting the letter from the Peace Corps. And it was a placement in Kazakhstan.
Was that where Borat was filmed?
Yeah, right. And this is pre-Borat, right? So when that's exactly right. So when I got that, I'm like, I'm not even 100% sure I know where Kazakhstan is. I mean, it's a stan. I go do some research and I realize that it's like super cold and not very populated and big empty steppe and I'm like, gosh, is that really what I want to do? And then I thought about it and I understood that basically what they were doing is sending Peace Corps volunteers to work in nonprofit organizations in order to try to build up the economy and to leverage the probably natural resources that are there, but impact the economy in a positive way. And I was like, look, that's why I'm doing it. So next thing I know, I went on eBay, sold my car, got rid of my apartment, packed up and headed to Kazakhstan, did 3 months of training in the mountains near Almaty, which is one side of Kazakhstan. And then I took a train for 62 hours to the other side of Kazakhstan, literally 62 hours, and lived for 2 years in Urals, Kazakhstan. So that is about 12 hours north of the Caspian Sea and 4 or 5 hours south of the Russian border. And it was an experience. I mean, like I loved it. There's certain aspects that were amazing. I lived with an incredible Kazakh family, and I worked in a almost a business incubator where we brought in small mom and pop companies and helped them get up and running. But it could be like a local barber and a local art company, print shop, and so forth and so on. And then we worked on microcredit financing. So we would help finance companies in the area and so forth and so on.
I love that because it's basically like helping brands, which is not what your company does, but you were doing it like literally face to face, mom and pop level.
Yeah.
I love
entrepreneurs, definitely, but entrepreneurs at grassroots, very grassroots.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so let's come up to present day. You've left the Peace Corps. I believe you come back to the U.S., and it's around this time you start Sparks and Honey.
I do a couple other things in between. I run an agency in between here in New York. So I come back, get my feet rooted in New York and some strategy jobs, then end up running an agency part of Omnicom. And then I left and I took some time off and said, if I were going to create a company that is, back to the way you started with Mad Men, a different way to think about the model in advertising, a way to still tap into human behavior and culture, which drives what any ad that we make, what would that new advertising model look like? And, spent 4 or 5 months working on writing that business plan, floating it to different investors, and came to Omnicom, and they decided to invest in it.
Awesome. So what is Sparks and Honey, and how is it different? What is this new agency model?
Yeah. So basically, think about Sparks and Honey as a cultural consultancy, and we basically are taking in all types of different data, and we are using that data. And different data can be social media data, secondary research, anthropological research, so forth and so on. We're using that data in order to understand human behavior. What makes Kevin Siskar do what Kevin Siskar does? Why do people, have the feelings they do about gun policy and gay marriage and trust and banking and so forth and so on? And so we use our system in order to monitor in real time those subtle little small changes in culture. And then we have a series of methodologies that allow us then to predict where we see culture going. We use those outputs in order to primarily consult with Fortune 100 companies, sometimes government entities, on 3 things. One, how do you build your brand in a different way by understanding these shifts? Number 2, how do you innovate your products? So how do you make different types of products that are going to be relevant in the here and now and in the future? And then number 3, how do you take this and understand new business models, new revenue streams that may not exist today, but may be emerging and that may be just beginning to develop.
All right, I love it. And we're going to unpack sort of, those processes after the break here. But let's take a quick break. We're here with Terry Young talking about his company, Sparks and Honey, and we will be right back with more.
This is Ambition Today.
If you are enjoying Ambition Today, then please leave us a review in the iTunes store. If you don't know how to do that, just visit siskar.co and I'll show you how. Ambition Today is happy to partner with WeWork, a co-working space that lets you do what you love. WeWork has offices in over 140 locations worldwide, so regardless of where you're listening, they have you covered. And many of our portfolio companies for Founder Institute New York use WeWork for their early stage startups. You can work from anything from one-person offices to full teams. Visit siskar.co/WeWork to learn more, sign up, and get a discount today. And the Founder Institute, the world's premier startup launch accelerator. The Founder Institute has graduated almost 3,000 technology companies to date across 6 continents, and we've learned a ton from doing that. And we've used that data to compile the best personality traits of successful founders, such as fluid intelligence, openness, conscientiousness, and more. And we put that into a test. So if you want to know your entrepreneurial DNA and you want to find out what your personality profile is, visit fi.co/join/ambition to apply, take the test, and find out. And now back to this episode of Ambition Today.
Visit Ambition Today online at siskar.co and follow the show on social media at Ambition Today.
Welcome back. We are here with Terry Young, and we are talking about his company, Sparks and Honey, before the break. So Terry, you told us a little bit about it. Let's dive into what those processes are, right? And I think there's a few ways that, from my knowledge, you identify trends. You find the micro trends, you map those to macro trends that then map to mega trends, right? And so I've attended, along with some of the Founder Institute founders, the infamous Sparks and Honey culture briefings. Can you tell the audience what the culture briefings are, a bit about your process, and how those map the micro trends?
Yeah, sure. So the culture briefing is something that we started in the beginning, but we kind of stumbled upon, and this is the story of entrepreneurship, stumbled upon the real impact of it, because I don't think I had any clue of what the impact was going to be on Sparks and Honey when we first constructed it. In the beginning, we were like, hey, we need to have a method every day where we come together and we look at what's happening in culture. I mean, if you're going to understand culture 24/7, then we need to be on top of what's emerging in culture. Where that has evolved to has become a pretty sophisticated part of an active learning system. So every single day, the entire company, we have about 80 people now, come together and unpack culture in real time. And in that session, which is an hour daily, we'll have anywhere from 25 to 40 weak signals. And those are signals that have emerged in our system over the previous 24 hours. And what happens is there's two briefers in the front of the room that's managing the system in front of a whole series of televisions that's pushing data in real time. And they unpack the signal back out to the audience. And then what happens is basically crowdsourced pattern analysis, which is kind of what we stumbled upon. Yeah. That when you do this daily and you bring people together that have a system by which you can categorize what you're hearing, you can quickly start to weave together patterns that you wouldn't see otherwise. You can do what an algorithm does, but in real time. And so, we'll take a signal, something coming out of AI or something that we see from this challenging trust or the Me Too movement or whatever it is. And the teams can bucket that almost instantaneously into the taxonomy that you talked about. So these weak signals get laddered up to macro trends. Those macro trends get laddered up to mega trends. We understand where they fit, and someone is putting that into our database so that we can then see how that connects. And then the team has a real-time conversation about the connections they see around it. And so the briefings, we host probably 150 to 200 people a week. And so it's basically like a studio, like if you're going to watch the Today Show or whatever.
Yeah. I'm more than impressed. And as you said, they've morphed over the years. I came a few years ago and it was, you guys talking, and now it's full on production. You guys have the algorithms are being pumped into the screens, and there's, sets, and it's like TMZ for daily culture. And it's amazing. And I love the conversations that everyone has around it, because it's not just, a pure tech company would just have this raw data, right? And that's not very informative if it's not talked about, and that is what culture is, mm-hmm. right? So it's I love that you guys use that as inputs, then have a conversation about it, and then, expand the data even more, which is amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
And people can check that out on Facebook, right?
Yeah, so now we live stream Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the first 20 minutes of the briefing. So you tune in at noon to 12:20, you can see the first 20 minutes of the briefing. And then we also open the door. I mean, this is an open agency in that we will invite people in. I mean, we'll have, a given day, a CEO, people from the UN, people from government, university students, all coming in and helping enhance the conversation, because it's a collaborative environment. So you'll see where it's like ping pong, it's bouncing around the room, all the different ideas.
And that's on your what's the Facebook page? Just Sparks and Honey.
Yeah, Sparks and Honey, and you'll see it there. You can register, and there's hundreds of people around the world that watch it every single day.
Amazing. So we talked about the micro trends, the daily culture briefings. I want to talk about how that maps a little bit, right? You said it ladders up, right? Mm-hmm. And I followed Sparks and Honey. I followed you for a few years now, and I've seen it work firsthand, right? You guys were talking about esports before any VC I know was talking about esports, and VCs are normally some of the earliest adopters of new tech trends, right? So, where is the company today? I guess also from you said you're 60 or 80 people. Where's the company today? And then also let's talk a little bit about those macro trends that you're seeing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just give the example that you're bringing up around esports. I mean, what we are trying to do is make change visible, see things when they're very first emerging. And I remember, whether it was probably 4.5 years ago, we were observing people watching other people play video games on YouTube, pre-Twitch, right?
Yeah.
And when we see something like that, then we take our cultural strategist or an anthropologist to do observations. So they observe what they're seeing in the real world and ask ourselves questions about, is there an opportunity here? Is something emerging that is different or out of the ordinary? And it wasn't probably 4 or 5 months after that Twitch launched and, the whole esports phenomenon happened. So this method allows us to see things very, very early on. And sometimes when things are emerging, it's very easy to dismiss them. It's the same principle of exponentials. You have the exponential curve, or the same principle of disruption. It looks like it's very small and not going to make any impact, and then all of a sudden it explodes. And that's what the system is designed to do, to understand that. We basically take those little micro signals and connect them into macro trends. And macro trends are trends that are going to impact an organization 1 to 3 years out. And then we connect the macro trends into mega trends. And mega trends are trends that are going to impact an organization 5 to 10 years out. And that vertical integration is very powerful because it allows you to take the most granular thing that's happening in the world that may seem very random and give it structure. And so this is taking and once it has structure, we've built algorithms that then score it and give us some sense of where we should focus, where to use zig or zag.
Yeah, and I'm looking at some of the macro trends here, and tech and science. You have digital detox, which I think we're definitely starting to see people overthrow technology in their day-to-day lives a little bit. In the humanity, extreme safety, time poverty. I actually just taught a time-saving class last month. It's amazing to see all these as they develop. And I know one of the bigger trends that you guys have been on, esports, you guys went kind of all in on a few years ago, and recently, looking at the report here, space.
Yeah.
A quick thank you. I met my first astronaut at your last event, which was amazing.
Fantastic.
For the inner nerd of me. So thank you for that. I thought that was pretty cool. Apparently there's only 500 some astronauts alive.
Right. And we worked with 3 or 4 on the report that we produced.
Yeah, it was amazing to meet Michael. And then last month, obviously, Elon landed the dual boosted rockets, part of the Falcon Heavy launch. It was successful. But I know this space is actually much bigger than people realize.
Yep. Literally.
Literally. So how should companies be thinking about space, and what are some of the most interesting things you've realized from paying attention to?
Well, the reason we started to push into that particular area is twofold. Number one, the amount of innovation that is created by NASA and other VCs as we work toward getting to Mars. So let's take the time horizon of now to 2035. Those innovations will not only help us get to Mars, those innovations will help us here on Earth. They'll help us impact companies, impact our lives in better ways. And I think we are entering a few decades where we're going to have this push, which may look more like the push we had in the 60s to get to the moon. In doing that, there's a role for brands and corporations to play in the way they leverage those technologies and then the way they support those technologies to be created. And so that's why we did the body of work. We went deep on all the different aspects of what is emerging. One amazing thing that I am very bullish on is space data, right? I mean, if you rewind 10 years ago, most of the data that we could get from space came from governments. Today, there's all kinds of satellites that have been put into space that allow for commercial understanding of what's happening back on the Earth. And that data will allow us to do things and enhance life here on the Earth in ways that we couldn't previously. And so just like we've talked about big data, you overlay big data with space data, and it's going to allow, and there's a lot of startup activity in this particular space, allow us to do things that we we wouldn't be able to do previously.
One of the things that was a big takeaway for me is CubeSats. They're basically these tiny satellites that you can basically launch into space right now for tens of thousands of dollars, but quickly it's coming down to low thousands, maybe even hundreds eventually. And we have we had a company that we had at one of our events a few months ago called Ursa Space, and they launched a CubeSat. There was some investment there, for, a few tens of thousands of dollars, and they put it over China. And it's an infrared camera that looks down on their oil caps, and they use it to determine how much the caps go up and down. And by doing so, they figure out China's oil data and then sell that to all the companies and banks that want it. And they're the only ones that has China's oil data because it's behind the iron curtain. And it's amazing. And so, I think, and then there was another stat, Coca-Cola owns something. They own equity, I think, in a satellite startup.
I think they have invested. There's several brands who have made investments in different space startups, but it's still probably not to the level I think it should be and could be, and which is part of what we try to do with esports. If you reflect on that, it was try to bring brands in to understand the potential of this being a legitimate sport. With space, it's trying to say this is not just the place where government plays, and we see that from Elon Musk and venture capitalists. It's a place where brands can create an impact as well. But you have to see the roadmap. You have to see how you can get there.
Well, last month's perfect proof of that, right? Like, Tesla used SpaceX for branding. Brilliant. So what are some of the other bigger mega trends you're seeing right now? What else are you super bullish on besides space?
Well, I mean, you have different altitudes of trends. And I would say there's a couple of things that we have been having a lot of debate around. One at the market level, and that is the impact if you look at CPGs and financial sector and what's happening with the increased proliferation and fragmentation in those markets. So if you take a large CPG company, what's basically happened is there are so many new entrants into the market. It's so much easier to get into those spaces, and you know this from Founders Institute, and they never hit the thresholds that used to be required for the big corporations. The big corporations said, we want the next billion-dollar brand. Now, instead of having billion-dollar brands or even $100 million brands, there's hundreds and hundreds of small $25, $30 million brands that may never go beyond that point. They may never be an appropriate acquisition target for a CPG company, but which creates complexity and creates mass fragmentation. But it's a huge market share stealer. I think you're in a moment in time of massive transformation because you have all this pressure on companies that have done something in one way for multiple decades, and now they have to figure out a different model. And you see that playing out in stock price and other places. A second one that I think is very important still at that higher level is really a definition of trust. And the trust that we put into brands and whether we really think brands are going to be important in the future, the trust we put into institutions, government, and the impact of things like fake news and fake ads, and who as consumers can we really trust, and how do we where do we place the value of trust in a world where the game has changed? And I mean, you can look at, trust is at an all-time low when it comes to brands and institutions, media outlets, so forth and so on. That creates a challenge for how we create something that is meaningful in people's lives and how you maneuver in that world where people lack that trust.
Yeah, no, I love it. So if people want to check this out, they can check out the Facebook Live. They can hit you guys up, maybe if they're in New York. And then you guys have an app as well?
Yeah, it's called Now Next. And basically what we do is you can download it on the iTunes, on the App Store. And it basically takes everything that comes out of the briefing, boils it down to the top 3 to 5, not trends, but more of the conversations that come out, the patterns that are created, so that you can get a little snapshot of the briefing in your pocket. Basically.
Yeah, love it. Everyone should go check out, download that app. So now it's time for the Ambition Today question of the day. If you have a question that you want submitted on the podcast, go to siscar.co and submit it. So Terry, our question of the day today is, how do you best recommend that people and organizations ride the waves of a trend, right? So you've identified them. So now how do you capitalize on it, right? How do you not miss the wave, surfing analogies, right? Like miss it or ride it too late. How do you know that you're capitalizing on it the right way?
Well, I mean, at the core of what we do at Sparks and Honey is basically tackling that question. And there's a lot of pieces to it. Number one, it's having the tools and technology to know where the trend is in the curve. Is the trend just emerging and it's super, super small? Is the trend, and how much velocity is it gaining? Is the trend all the way at the peak, or is the trend on decline? Number one. Number two, you have to know the kind of brand or organization you are. If you are a startup, you probably want to be catching something very, very early, right? And then you want to get VCs behind you and you want to ride that to the top. If you're a huge conglomerate that needs to drive tremendous volume, then maybe you want to catch something that's at the top of the peak, right? So there's something about that. There's a mechanism by which understanding where the trend is on the curve, and then there's another about really understanding yourself and what you're trying to accomplish in the marketplace.
All right, I love that answer. All right, that is a wrap for this episode. All the show notes, everything we talked about will be up on Syscar.co. If you haven't joined the back channel, you should get on board. The Ambition Today A-list is now available to join with an exclusive clip that we ask every guest at the end of every episode for the best piece of advice they've learned in their lifetime and the story of how they learned it. So go on to Syscar.co/A-list if you want to join the show's back channel today. Share this episode with a friend. They will thank you later. I want to thank you, Terry, for coming on. Is there anything else you want to plug? Where can people go to find out more about you, Sparks and Honey?
Yeah, but I mean, we had
Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, we're on Twitter, on Facebook. I would definitely check out Facebook because that's where you can see the briefing.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's in New York, we'd love to have you in the studio audience. And if you're interested in the reports, like the Space Report, you can find those on our website. Many of them can be downloaded for free.
Love it. All right. Well, stay curious, everyone, and I will see you all on the next episode of Ambition Today.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for listening to Ambition Today. Be sure to visit Syscar.co to get all the information from this episode and more great content. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.